Hello and welcome to today's video. I'm Sarah Turner and I'm joined again by my friend and colleague Laura Dougal. We are both working parent coaches and we've been doing a series of videos and blog posts looking at various topics around the whole experience of parents preparing for and returning from leave. And today, and in fact for this month, for June, we are exploring what does a smooth return look like. And so today's video is going to be in two parts. The first part, we're going to be thinking a little bit about organisations, and then the second part, looking at parents and what that smooth return looks like. So starting with organisations, Laura, what are your thoughts that you want to kind of start us off with as we think about that smooth return from an organisational perspective?
Yeah, when we started talking about this, we were saying one of the first things is equipping your line managers to be able to manage that return and the person coming back. And that is, there are so many things within that. But first of all, really, it's about the practicalities of making sure that your line managers understand your internal policies around maternity and paternity and parental leave, and also the statutory rights of the person returning, so that they really understand what is and what isn't okay to be happening, to be saying, those conversations that need to be had. I'm sure that you've seen it as well, and I've definitely seen it and heard it from various clients, that conversations just don't happen. And I think that is because there's a lot of fear around, like, oh, what am I allowed to say? What's okay to ask? Is it all right to ask this? And I think there is that part of read the policies, understand what you are and aren't able to talk about and able to say, what conversations you can and can't be having, to enable that to happen. And also just within that, even if you are unsure, I think the key to that is for line managers to be able to open a conversation with the person returning from leave, and having the confidence to be able to ask, like, what would you like to be happening now? What's your ideal? Even if it's something that we can't make happen, like just understanding, where are you coming from? What's happening in your world right now? It might be something that I haven't even thought of, and opening that conversation up. So yeah, making sure that line managers are prepared, I think, for employees to return in the way of understanding the policies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of building on that is this piece around compassion. And we were talking about this, weren't we? Because it is a huge transformative event, and actually being able to come at that from a position of curiosity, because my experience might be completely different to yours, to the next person's, and actually how I feel or what I want as I come back is going to be very different. And so just asking those questions, opening up that conversation, as you said, and really positioning this as an opportunity to maybe think about, maybe we can be a bit creative. How can we do things a bit differently, as you return, to set you up for success? So really thinking about those kinds of open conversations. And I think this piece around the kind of the culture or the team of the organization is a really important part that many organizations actually miss. And I think it's easy to think, oh, I'll pop in coaching as a solution. And of course, you and I would absolutely advocate that. But on its own, it's rarely enough. We need to be thinking about that whole employee experience of going off on leave, during leave, returning from leave, and making sure that that is as positive and supportive as it can be.
Absolutely, and thinking about that sort of that wider system, but also I think just in what you've said there as well, that the compassion piece of not forgetting, it's all very good, like knowing your policies, knowing your procedures, but don't forget that we're all just humans as well. So I guess as well, from a line manager's point of view, really understanding that the person who's coming back to work is now only a part of their lives, and there may well be lots of other things happening that you're not aware of. That person might only be getting like 2 or 3 hours sleep a night, for instance. So I think it's that, isn't it? The human bit of just asking, how are you? And really caring about the answer.
Yeah.
And if you're just getting oh, fine, really stopping and asking, come on, how are you really? What's going on for you? Tell me what's really happening. Just opening up that conversation.
And what I love about what you just said there, I had the same thing in my head around the how are you really? It's that whole mental health piece, isn't it? We see this everywhere when we talk about mental health. Is there no how are you really? Because often it's that second time that you ask that the person might open up and say, well, actually, I feel awful. I feel like I'm drowning. I feel like I'm struggling. I feel like I'm failing at, being a parent, being a colleague, being a team player, whatever it might be. And that starts to open up that conversation, which is a really important conversation to have, because if you don't know, you can't do anything. And, speaking of my own personal experience, when I wasn't given the opportunity, or I wasn't asked how I ended up leaving. And that happens to many, many women. So as organisations, we want to retain that key talent. So just asking that question, simple, but very effective.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking about that as well. Sometimes the line manager themselves might not have experienced becoming a parent themselves. And I think it's just finding ways to understand, to find out, like, what might they be thinking? That's really important, that might they as well, because even within that, everybody's experience will be completely unique. Like your experience will be different to my experience. Absolutely. Different to the next person's. But doing the sort of thinking around that, and these days, there are so many books that have been written by women, by lots of maternity return coaches actually as well, who are sort of talking about this experience and things. They're directed at women returning to work. But as a line manager, you could be reading things like that to sort of to get a bit inside the head of the person who's coming back, to understand it from their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so shall we move on to the second part of the video, where we're going to think a little bit about parents and what they can be thinking about as they prepare for that smooth return?
Yeah, definitely.
So where do we want to start here? Shall we touch on, and I know we've done some videos on some of this, so we're not necessarily going to do a deep dive on this, but what about some of your mums, when you're working with mums? What are some of the things that you might think through?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to a different point before before you said that, because the conversation that we had before as well, and I will come back to the question about specifically mums, but we were sort of talking, weren't we, about how, we are quite careful about the language that we're using these days, because the landscape is changing. This maternity return is not just something that mums need to think about. It is it is something that is there as a part in your partnership, however your family looks. It's not just the person who's given birth who is then going through this, although there are some things that will be unique to that. But yeah, I think because we sort of had toyed around, like, don't forget the dads and that kind of talk, but equally, just whatever your family looks like, I think there's some conversations to be had, isn't there? When you go from being two single people to having a child, there are conversations then that need to be had about, if we're operating as a team, what does that look like now? And it probably will look quite different to how it looked before the baby was involved. So it's about knowing kind of, if we're both working, how are we deciding whose job is a priority at what stage? Are we just saying, like, whoever earns the most money, their job is the priority, so whatever they need to do, they do it, and then the other person kind of manages around it? Or is it a case of actually our jobs are quite equal, and therefore we need to be thinking about, well, when this is happening and it's a pinch point for you, I need to be taking more on at home, and vice versa. But I think that is a point that really gets missed quite a lot, actually, in terms of, and I think it does appear to be a female problem, because women take maternity leave, and then even if they were at the same level in terms of career as their partners beforehand, that changes, because then they're at home. It tends to be that then, because they're at home, they take on more responsibility at home. And then when they go back to work, it's very difficult. It seems to be very difficult to have those conversations about, right, now we're both doing this again. How are we managing this new phase of our lives?
And I think we could probably do a whole video on societal expectations and gender, and how we're raised, and whether it's conscious or unconscious, who picks up the mental load, but I mean, I've worked with same-sex couples, I've worked with surrogacy, I've worked with adoption. There's all, as you say, that family makeup is different. But what I do think is interesting is, the market has broadened to start thinking much more holistically about parents per se, right? And moving away from gender necessarily, mums and dads, and more into parents. But it's difficult because, as you say, as a woman getting pregnant, giving birth, physically, mentally, the impact that has on me is going to be quite unique. And I was talking about this with you earlier, but, you know, there's some research also that's been showing that, you know, women's experience or mothers' experience of having a baby is actually quite different to men's in terms of the impact on their career. All of that stuff we've just touched on with societal implications and all the rest of it. So yeah, we could do a whole video on it. But I guess, you know, so thinking about broadly how we support parents as they return, yes, absolutely. Thinking about how you're sharing that load at home. And I think also I've been reading about how more and more fathers in particular now, and this is a relatively new phenomenon, are wanting to be more engaged and present, possibly COVID influence, I don't know. And therefore maybe wanting to do flexible hours or compressed hours or working from home more. And so actually organisations do need to be thinking about how are we supporting dads as they're coming back off parental leave and parents more broadly, because even if you're in a same-sex couple, you're still going to have that same kind of conversation about who's doing what and how are we going to juggle it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you said something earlier about that sort of taking the chance now to see this as an opportunity to change rather than as an organisation, rather than feeling like this is the way that it's always been done, so it has to be done this way. Right now is a very interesting time, I think, to do the work that we do in particular around return to work, just with all the change that's going on around it. And yeah, the landscape of families, I think, is changing, and therefore the landscape of work is changing, and vice versa, and they affect each other. So I don't think I answered your question though.
Well, I mean, let's very quickly, for any mums who might be watching then, just, and again, sort of we're saying this with that view in mind that, you know, physically getting pregnant, being pregnant, giving birth, breastfeeding, adjusting to all of that, the impact it can have on your confidence as you're coming back to work. What are the sorts of things that you find in your work that helps mums think about that smooth return?
Yeah, I think it is things like you said, sort of trying to get in early and thinking about the planning element of it, I think is a huge thing, like trying to, you know, thinking about and again, this isn't just a mum's responsibility, but I think for that first day back at work and I can only speak as a mum, as that's what I am, but having done the dry run to nursery and then to work, like knowing the commute, all of that sort of stuff, understanding and feeling really confident in the childcare that you've got arranged, so that when you do have that first day back at work, you can be in it as much as you can be, and focused on what you're doing, rather than that kind of like, it's both of our first day, you know, and the baby's first day and my first day. So that's one thing I always think about, is that sort of planning element of, you know, what's going to give you the best start back, what sort of things do you need to just make sure are kind of dealt with and cleared away in your mind. And obviously, you know, who knows what the experience on the day will be. There might be illness, there might be things coming up. And I think that as well, just sort of accepting that there will be some uncertainty. You know, you always hear people saying about, you know, when babies start nursery, they're always ill and catch this, that and the other. I have to say my experience wasn't that. My daughter was never ill. And yours was. But my daughter was never at nursery. So again, it just goes to show everybody's different. But I think there is something of, you know, if you know, and I speak again as like, I'm somebody who I like things to be in just the right way. I like to have control. I might say I'm a bit of a perfectionist, that kind of, but if you know that about yourself, now is the time, I think, to be sort of allowing, like, I'm not in control of everything. There are some things that are out of my control. I can only control what's within my control.
Yeah, and I agree. And things like your support network. So if baby is ill, who can I call on? Is it always me? Does my partner pick it up? With my mum, my sister, my friend, whoever it might be? Thinking about your non-negotiables, and you know, we could probably do a whole video on that. But you know, just thinking about if nursery hours, I've got to be able to drop off or pick up at this time, or whatever that might look like. And then confidence is often something that comes up. And we're going to do another blog post on this, but just some of the things I'd say is really manage your expectations. The number of women in particular I speak to who just come in with sky high expectations that they're going to just come in, hit the ground running, just like they did before they had the baby. And they may be able to do that. I'm not going to say they're not, but that's quite a big expectation of yourself. So just, you know, build up slowly, have a phased return, and sort of celebrate those small wins as you get them.
Yeah, I agree.
We also talked about buddying, didn't we? Having a buddy at work, you know, and again, and this would sort of, I would say, lead us into maybe that conversation about other partners as well. So dads would absolutely be part of this too, but, you know, seeing this as like a shared experience. So, you know, having the opportunity to kind of have a parenting support network, or whatever that might look like within the organisation, that's a great way. If you haven't maybe got the budget to extend coaching to everybody, is create an opportunity for them to share their own stories, because that can really help to normalise their experiences and their lack of sleep or their guilt at their partner, you know, still breastfeeding at 3 a.m. and she's got a presentation at 9 a.m. or whatever it might be. I think there's a really important piece there not to forget about the partners.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, yeah, sorry, I think I was more thinking about what you were saying about the sort of parenting network as well, and telling stories is so important. I couldn't tell you the amount of times, you know, in coaching sessions where someone's talking about something and my response might be, you know, let me just reassure you that, you know, you're like the third person today, but and they'll be like, really? Oh, and just that is like, yes, this is, you know, you are not alone in what you're experiencing, although it will be unique to you. So there's something really important, I think, as an organisation, to be sharing those stories, and particularly from people in leadership positions, you know, showing this is what is possible, but this is also the reality of being human and what it is to become a parent.
Yeah, so I think if we're thinking about a smooth return, it's, you know, finding that support, whether your organisation offers it or not formally, you know, find a buddy, find a friend, find some form of support network so that you can share your experience. And I loved, you talked about this sort of team sport idea. You know, it's a team situation. You know, we collectively are going back to work. How are we going to navigate this? You know, again, try and plan if that's your way. I've also had clients do things like maybe a Sunday night meeting, like what does the week ahead look like? You've got to be in Nottingham that day, I've got an early morning meeting that day. You know, really thinking about how we're going to support each other so that collectively this is you know, a successful return.
Yeah, we do that actually now still. Every Tuesday night is planning night. I don't know why Tuesday, just that's the night, but Tuesday night is planning night, and it makes our lives so much easier in the long run, because then we just had that moment to say, like, you know, this is everything we need to know, and do diary management. It does make everything a lot easier. I think we've gone well over the time. We're just really telling.
Yes, there's so much to say, isn't there? So much to say, but we are going to be doing a few blog posts as well, aren't we, this month? So there's more to come.
Yeah, we are. So thank you very much. If you've managed to get to the end, thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know your thoughts on these topics as well. So please do feel free to share either in the comments or send us a message or an email, because we'd love to know, like, what sort of things, also, what have you heard today that has resonated with you? And also, you know, what's missing from the conversations that we're having. We'd love to be able to broaden the conversations that we have in these videos. And if you are interested in more information, Sarah and I last year did a series of videos going through sort of typical coaching conversations from pre-return to work right through to the return and beyond. So if you would like that, just send us a message on LinkedIn and we can send you the link to that, no problem.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you very much for watching.